So thank you for coming to the last panel of Tuesday. And I know that it's very, it's challenging to get inside when it's so lovely and sunny outside. But anyway, we've got a great panel. We are live streaming this as well, and we plan on having lots of time for questions. So definitely, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll make sure we get to it. So right now, we have a panel who are going to talk about what video AI and machine learning is. And that's AI is a term that has been floating around for a long time, and it's not new, but it possibly is going to be new to some of you who are working in the video space. I think one of the interesting things is we have people here on the panel from a bunch of different areas. I'm going to first introduce myself. My name is Nadine Kravitz. I am a contributing editor at Streaming Media Magazine. I'm also a consultant, and I work and do program management in many of the areas that I write about. So I became interested in this topic a little while ago, and I wrote and did a session for Streaming Media East. And at the time, for Streaming Media East, I asked in the room after we were done, who is using AI in their video, in their workflow, in their production, in any part of their work that they are doing in video. Now, if you think about what you're doing today, and you think about what you interpret video AI to mean, who here, by a show of hands, is actually using video AI? Okay, so we have 4 people. So, and what I suspect is that there's actually a few more people here than just the 4. But what I'm going to first start to do is we're going to introduce the panel, and we'll be talking about some of the both misconceptions as well as some of the possibilities of what you can do with video AI, and why you'll actually see that probably more than 4 people in the audience are actually right now using AI within their video. So why don't I start off and let Sangeeta introduce herself, and we'll work down and go from there.
Thank you. Thanks, Nadine. Good afternoon. Welcome to the panel. I'm Sangeeta Ramakrishnan. I'm a distinguished engineer at Cisco Systems in the CTO office. I currently lead a data science team, and we are focused on network optimizations, including for streaming media.
Andy.
And my name is Andy Beach. I work at Microsoft. I'm in a group called Commercial Software Engineering. We're a partner engineering team that works with our largest partners on their biggest problems. So I work with our media and communications partners on a variety of projects that they have in this space.
Suzanne.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Rainey, and I'm with Jump. Jump is AI-enabled analytics for video services focused on content and users. Amazon, Netflix, and Google are masters of data, and until now there really hasn't been an easy-to-use, available, and affordable way for other video providers to provide this kind of analytics. We're based in Madrid. Our clients include American Mobile, Fox, and PCCW, and what we provide is business intelligence. We have over 100 industry-standard KPIs that are beautifully presented in an easy-to-use format, advanced analytics, including churn prediction and clustering, and marketing automation.
Okay, and Ethan.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Ethan Dreilinger, a solutions engineer with IBM Watson Media. And I understand we're the straight line between you guys and beer, so try to be engaging as we go through this afternoon. My group in IBM is very focused on applying AI into the media space, and we'll get into a couple of the use cases that we've done today and some of the stuff that we're working on for the future.
Perfect. Okay. Now, one of the things that floats around in the universe is that AI is everywhere, but there's also a lot of misconceptions about what AI and machine learning is. So for each of you, when you come and you are talking to either your customers, your colleagues, people who you run into, what are the things that come out of their mouths that you hear and you're like, nah, that's not really AI? Andy, you're laughing, so you get to go first on this one.
Well, I'm laughing because I feel like AI has become the new version of 3D. It's the magic powder that gets sprinkled into all marketing decks,
Okay.
right? And so at IBC, I felt like that was definitely a thing. Everybody had to have an AI story. I think if you start to sort of differentiate between the two words, AI most often gets used for some sort of trained model or service that someone's using to do something, and machine learning is more of a true raw resource that they may be applying into a given service. And again, that's a very loose term, but there's a lot of different ways to use it. But the more and more I see people talking about it, the more that's sort of the differentiation between those two ways of using the terms. AI is someone else's, it's sort of ML as a platform, or ML as a service that I'm going to go use, and then the ML is a little more of a raw data acquisition and churn process.
Now, what about people thinking that AI just can do everything, and it just works? Ethan, I know that we talked about this.
AI is a tool in the box to be used and applied in specific spots, specific use cases to help you get to a solution. AI by itself, I'm unaware of a spot in the media space where AI is a solution to a problem. It's a path to a solution to the problem. And I think that's the biggest misconception, is people think that they're going to take an AI solution, plug it in, and solve their problems. What they're going to be able to do is understand the path to a problem resolution, because AI is going to help go through data sets, help point out anomalies, and some other stuff along those lines that will get you to that path to a conclusion. But think about AI as a tool, same as an editor, same as a code base, same as whatever else you're doing. It's just one more tool in the box to be used.
Yes, and I think it's good to define it specifically rather than what it isn't. And what I think of it as is using mathematical techniques with big data coupled with great computing power. And how we're using it, for instance, is with natural language processing in our deep recommender, as well as image recognition and content recognition. And then we're using machine learning for churn and also our clustering algorithms.
Yeah, just to add to that, another characteristic of machine learning is there's typically a training phase to it. That is, just because one interprets a data doesn't make it machine learning. It also has a training component to it. But in general, I agree. Machine learning is, think of it as another tool in your toolbox, and you can use it to solve problems. Now, machine learning itself is not going to solve anything for you. Just like in the late 90s, everybody wanted to have a website. The website itself does not solve any problem for you. You have to figure out what you're going to do with your website in order to achieve whatever your goals might be, whether it be marketing, promotion, customer acquisition, whatever. So machine learning to me is like that. It's really a toolkit, and you've got to know how to use it.
Okay, so we talked about having specific use cases which you can use with AI, and we want some very practical examples here. So I guess, Ethan, I'll start with you. And if we say, what is something that someone can actually do with AI? So now we're talking hands-on, something that will work.
So one of the things that IBM has been relatively successful at in applying AI is around sports and creating highlights, using cognitive capabilities to flag moments in sporting events and then isolate them for a lot of different use cases. So we have a video, it's better to show it than to explain it, of something that we did with Fox Sports for the FIFA World Cup. So what the Fox Sports highlight machine was we took every match ever played in the FIFA World Cup, processed it through our Watson Video Enrichment engine, put markers into M3U8 files, put them out into an S3 bucket, and fans were able to go in and go through, and you saw how you can select plays, play types, players, countries, create your own highlights from across the decades of the FIFA World Cup. One of the KPIs that Fox was using in this case was about engagement with video. So average time spent on video on the Fox Sports website is a little bit under a minute. With the highlight machine for that section around the World Cup, video engagement was up over 4.5 minutes. Completely sponsored, sold out. The ROI was crystal clear by the time we were done with it, where Fox came out ahead of it, and you can look for some more applications of that type of technique in the next, for the Women's World Cup and a couple of other events coming up.
So one of the things that you did was take a whole kind of section of content and go and learn exactly what it was that you needed to know about the content, being able to work and manipulate it, being able to generate content, and then you actually gave the user the ability to actually go and create their own clips.
And that's one specific use case. For like tennis and golf, we've taught Watson about tennis, golf, and now soccer. We have a couple of sports that are coming up that I don't think we can announce yet. But in the case of tennis and golf, for instance, we create the highlights, we'll create those pointers to the highlights, and then there's some human intervention after that from an editorial process to push it out to a website, push it out to social channels, et cetera. We create some scores and some rankings of those highlights and stuff along those lines. So depending on what the use case is and what they want, in the case of Fox Sports for that highlight machine, they wanted to put the power in the hands of the end user. I'm not going to tell you what the highlights are. I'm not a soccer guy, I'm more of a hockey guy, so I just wanted to see yellow cards and red cards. So that's all I looked at the whole time, just yellow cards, red cards, that's all I wanted to see. And that was perfect for me. Other people were all in on the corner kick, so you can just watch every corner kick from every World Cup game ever played. And that's taking an AI process and a tool set from AI and applying it to a business case and then creating a business out of it where you're actually making money.
Okay, very cool. Suzanne, so we talked about use cases. What would be one use case that you think is really relevant?
Yes, so I also like to show rather than tell. So churn prediction is the use case that I want to show you.
Okay. So is this your video?
The video, yeah.
Hi, welcome back. We are going to look at service cancellations. It's our churn module. Here we have an analysis of the cancellations. It looks at what people were watching while they were on the service, and also how long people subscribed to your service. We look at the churn rate over time and can make a prediction on how it's going to trend in the future. We look at your churn risk. In this example, we have 73% that are low risk users, 23% that are high risk, and just under 5% that are at the top risk of churning from your service. And importantly, we look at the main influencers on churn. We look at 70 different attributes, and here the top, in this case, the top 5 variables are average playback time, which is contributing 11%, cumulative playback time, contributing 9%, proportion of active days, contributing 6%, recent tenure, 6%, and then active days over the last month also contributing. And what I think is interesting about these variables is how interrelated they are. You can also look at the churn rate in more detail. And here we have our top risk users are using the service only 10 minutes a month compared to the low risk users that are using it 25 minutes. We can take those just under 3,000 top risk users and immediately make an impact on your video service.
Okay, So when you say AI can help you with churn, does that mean that you have the ability to take a look at what people are watching and determine that they're in the future not going to be able to, they're not going to have the interest, they'll churn out of it
It's exactly, for SVOD providers, we're using machine learning in order to look at the whole base of data from the service and then cluster them into people that are similar and then predict whether or not they're going to churn.
Okay. So far we've got automated clips, we've got the churn analysis. Andy, what about you? So when you're thinking about a really important use case,
Sure.
what comes to mind?
So the biggest one that Microsoft's been working with as a start, I think there's a lot more coming, but the biggest one that we've started with is metadata extraction. And so it's a place where a lot of people need help. And so we actually productized a service called Video Indexer, which is the video I gave you. So I'll sort of set it up and then we'll watch it. But we basically took a number of different AI-based media-related services and put it together into one place where you can upload your content and it immediately extracts a wealth of data. It does speech to text, creating a real-time transcript that's searchable of all of the content that's there. It also does face recognition, looking for matches to a celebrity database that we manage, but also allowing you to name and match faces that you have that are reoccurring. And then a number of things like brands and logos and objects that go into that as well. Keywords are another big area.
Okay.
And so you can sort of see that UI in the video that'll play.
Okay, let me just do that for you.
Every company that has a large video library faces the same problem. Tagging videos manually is expensive and often leads to errors. Introducing Video Indexer. Using advanced AI technologies, this service can automatically extract metadata from any video, spoken words, printed text, faces, emotions, and more, helping clients easily search, review, curate, and publish much deeper insights from their content. Imagine being able to easily search specific people, find everything they said on a particular topic, even get a transcript translated to a different language, search street signs or words on screen. This advanced way of indexing video can be used to help customers build intelligent apps, such as deep search, personalized recommendations, automating video workflows, targeted video advertising. The possibilities go on and on. Video Indexer can efficiently help news agencies and sports broadcasters monetize their content, help retailers, manufacturers, and smart city tech providers easily improve their business insights at any scale you need. And speaking of flexible, you can use it without writing a single line of code, or embed it into your application using APIs. Want to see it in action? Sign up for a free trial with just an email address. Upload a few videos and see how this exciting new service can help get more out of your content now, only with Video Indexer.
So it sounds like what you are doing is taking the unstructured world of video and making it structured.
Yeah, trying to. I mean, trying to. There's not a single place that you want to extract metadata. You want that transcript, but you want to be able to apply context to it. So that's yet another sort of process that we can do, and that's where sort of the emotional intent comes out of some of it. But then also being able to apply that to the faces that are there. So it's pulling all those different groups of data and making it searchable and indexable in a way that is useful to someone's business model.
Okay, so from what I understand then, your customers have the ability to take the video, upload it, have it analyzed, have the content pulled out from the narration, right? Have image recognition done from the video content, have the ability to search through the text that is created from the narration analysis. And
translate that into any of the languages we support.
Okay, and live VOD?
Primarily focused on VOD, particularly in the way that Video Indexer is set up to go in today. But there's a number of things that they're working on towards live that will be productized next year and will be available. So there's live things in the roadmap, but all of the VOD things that we just talked about are all available today.
Okay, great. Now, Sangeeta, we talked about some of your interests, and you said that there's all sorts of different areas that video AI can be applied, but what's your favorite?
Yeah. So I don't have any nifty marketing video.
That's okay.
I guess as the engineer on the panel. So the areas that I think at least relevant to Cisco that we're looking at are related to how do we optimize the network for video delivery. Video is a vast majority of the traffic on the internet today, whether it be on fixed broadband or mobile. How do we ensure that we can optimize its delivery, both in terms of improving the user experience for users who are consuming video, but also protecting other users who just want to say, you want to go online and check in for your flight from your phone, but others downloading big videos are slowing you down. So how can we apply machine learning and data science tools to improve the delivery of video? So that's one example of something that we're doing, leveraging these new tools that we have with machine learning. Traditionally, one would have to do either a rule-based method. That's another term that you might see often, where a rule-based method is it's not like it has been learned from the data. It is an operator or a user goes and configures that if something exceeds a certain threshold, then report an alarm or do some take some certain steps. Versus with machine learning, we're automatically trying to learn what are the best settings for the different products in order to optimize the delivery of video, which if you think about it, almost all of network optimization today becomes a problem of video optimization because vast majority of the network traffic is video. So if we can enhance, improve the delivery of video over networks, we're overall improving the internet, whether it be mobile, Wi-Fi, eventually 5G, any of these. So that is the area that I'm quite passionate about and working on actively.
Now, we talked about how if you're collecting data, you have the ability to look at that information, but you have to have the ability first to take the data and then to train it.
Yes.
And so, in fact, the question, I guess, would go for all of you, because really, you have the business models, you have the use cases, but what happens, Ethan, when you have someone saying, I'm in the cooking industry or segment, what are you doing there? Because obviously AI and machine learning is only as good as the training.
So what I like to say is you have to treat AI today like a 5-year-old. It only knows what you tell it. So in the case of the World Cup that we did with Fox Sports, we spent probably about 8 weeks teaching Watson about the game of soccer. So the rules, the players, the countries, the idiosyncrasies that Fox was introducing to the broadcast of those matches, all of that enabled to create those highlights. So when, if scripts were to come to us and say, hey, we want to create, cognitive-based cookbooks, so you can plan your meals for you a month out and put shopping lists together for you and stuff along those lines, we would go in and train against cooking. So you want to understand, what ingredients are, what oven is, what cooking temperatures are, how to detect whether it's medium rare, that type of thing. So you want to be able to tell the AI engine what it is you want to do, and then let the AI engine start to learn from itself as it's going through that process. We do a live captioning and actually a VOD-based captioning as well through AI. And in order for the live captioning to work, we literally feed it scripts from the show about 20 minutes before airtime. So it trains up on that particular show and then returns those on-air closed captions in the broadcast. We do that in local news. So if you think about it, and I'm a New York guy, so I'll give you guys a New York reference. North of New York City is a bridge, goes from Westchester, Rockland County, called the Tappan Zee Bridge. Tappanzee, capital T, capital Z, and by the way, it's now called the Mario Cuomo Bridge. Any of those things can pop up in a broadcast, and it's only a New York thing. So people out here in Los Angeles aren't going to care about that. So New York stations are going to train Watson that way. Here in Los Angeles, you're going to probably try to train on the difference between Simi Valley and Silicon Valley or something along those lines. So you can vary and train to what your use case is.
Now, the training, though, has to happen in each of your examples, doesn't it? So, Suzanne, for you, when you actually are looking at the churn, how are you training your systems?
So we train it. You have to make sure you have the right amount, at least a minimum of 6 months of data.
6 months of data.
And then we found that is probably optimum to retrain it every 3 months.
Okay. And Andy?
Yeah, no, you're always training models because, even the English language is always changing, but the presenters and the other people that are talking within the videos, it's constantly rotating. So I think particularly when we looked at things like the Video Indexer, there's a certain amount of training that goes in just to get a baseline, but then you're constantly improving the system. There's basically somewhere between a 10 and 15% of the model that is basically just spent sort of recursively training and making everything better as part of that process.
Walk me through, how does this training work? Like, what do you actually have to do?
Some of it is involves users helping identify things that are constantly reoccurring. So if it's identified objects but it doesn't quite know how to place them, or it's mistaking two different faces as one person, or the reverse of one person being sort of mislabeled as two different people because maybe they look slightly different in certain shots. So being able to identify and correct that one time as a human intervention, with the hopes that the machine now knows to make that assumption sort of greater, basically loosening or tightening its description of that person's face. So that you get closer matching.
Okay, so there's no fairy dust, basically. It's people kind of going thumbs up, thumbs down, right?
There is no fairy dust at the end of the day. I always wish that there was, but instead it's just hours and hours and hours of teaching computers to do the same thing over and over, so that we don't have to have humans do the same thing.
Yeah, there's
for
no
hours
fairy
and hours.
dust in AI at all.
Yes.
Okay. And I read recently that Amazon's they attribute 35% of their sales to AI. And I also disturbingly recently read that they were using AI for applications, and their method was eliminating women.
Okay, so you can train AI to go and figure out
and you think they'd be able to retrain that, but the article said they just were abandoning it.
Okay.
So sometimes you can't even fix it.
So sometimes AI is just not that smart. Is that what you're saying?
It's only as smart as the
as
data
the
and
data
the
that goes into it.
questions.
Absolutely.
Okay, the data that goes into it. In fact, that's
Needs
the next
to be
question.
checked.
And also just a point on the data that goes into it. Sometimes people talk about the gobs and gobs of data they gave a system and whether it worked or not. Like we had a customer who was giving us, and he said, oh, we have millions of data points we've given you. You should be able to figure it out. But if we were looking, in that particular case, we were doing anomaly detection and we needed seasonality. They've given us a lot of data points, but it doesn't cover enough time period to capture that seasonality. Like if you have various things that happen only on weekends, or that happen only on 3-day weekends, 4-day weekends, holiday periods, things like that, then you have to have enough data that covers all of those use cases. So just don't get carried away with the number of data points, but also the quality of the data points also matter.
And we, in fact, we talked about data, and I don't want to kind of jumble the questions, but when you talk about data, one of the things that you mentioned was capturing data for the future, right? Mm-hmm. And what was important to you about how to prepare people moving into the future?
Yeah. So like Suzanne had mentioned in her case, they needed 6 months of data in order to train. So for many of you, if you're not yet ready to use machine learning, AI, maybe you're not yet at a point where you know what you're going to do with it, my suggestion to you would be to start at least logging as much data as possible. Because maybe 2 months later or 6 months later, you decide to pursue machine learning with various use cases, the vendor that you work with is going to ask you for data. So then instead of telling the vendor, okay, let's start collecting data today, and then it'll be 6 months later that you have the data that the vendor could use and produce something of value for you, even if you're not sure, now would be a good time to invest in trying to sort out how much data can you log, what are you going to do with it, what might be interesting data to log. So even if you're not yet sure, that might be a good sort of thing to do now before you even get to the point of needing to use it.
In fact, I'm going to ask you all that. So think of yourselves as consultants to your customers. And Ethan, when you say to them, collect data, what are the things that you think that they should look at?
Well, actually, I very rarely say go collect data.
Okay.
Most of my customers are in the media space, and I'm sure most of the people in this room are in and around the media space. I had the CIO of a large network owner say to me once, you know what, my problem is it's not that I don't have data, it's I don't know what data I have. So it's understanding the data that you have and then understanding what you want that data to say to you, right? Are you looking for engagement? Are you looking for ROI? Are you looking for churn? Are you looking for network compatibility? Those data sets are probably all there. I mean, based on just, from set-top box data to what you're doing with websites and apps, player data, download data, all of that stuff is sitting there, and it all kind of sits in individual silos. What you can use AI to do is sort of look across that and start to pick out anomalies, start to pick out patterns, right? Create those cohorts. From those cohorts can come business models and business plans. So it's not so much collecting the data, but it's also then leveraging the data in a smart way.
Suzanne, how about you when you say to your customers?
So we do recommend that you start collecting your data, because you do need historical data to be able to then make the insights and predictions, and as you say, look at the trends. And we also are seeing a lot of people create data lakes, and are recommending that people do that so that your data is unified and cleaned and stored and ready and flexible.
Yeah, I think that's every AI and ML project really becomes a big data project at some point, because it's how do I organize and store and conform and clean it in a way that I can actually access it and do something with it. And so I think that becomes the real big trick, and where a lot of the time gets spent is making it more accessible, the data.
Okay. So we're in the big data project, and we've got data. And what happens when we have engineers who may not know the media and entertainment space? So Sangeeta, we talked about this. So you may have a lot of information, but you may have engineers whose background is not in your particular field. What happens then?
I think that's one of the big challenges that a lot of companies are finding today, the ones who are actually building the machine learning tools. Now, if you're someone who's just going to use the tool, maybe you may not face it as much. But those of us who are building the technology have the challenge that a lot of the fresh graduates, recent graduates who worked in the machine learning space are very good with data science, machine learning. They know all the tools. They're good with Python, R, all of the packages. But of course, they don't have domain expertise, whatever the domain be, whether it be encoding, transcoding, streaming, transport, any of those technologies, they don't have that background. So at least in what I have seen work well is you do need to have people who can bridge that gap, who have a deep domain understanding, but understand enough of machine learning to get the best value out of the data scientists that you have. So there is that sort of bridging the gap between the two domains that needs to happen between the data science field and whatever the domain is, whether it be streaming, encoding, or playback. Because otherwise it becomes a challenge, because the machine learning team, if they purely are data scientists, they may answer a few questions, but maybe nobody cares about those questions, right? You have to apply them in a way such that it's relevant to the domain. Because machine learning can provide a lot of insights. Not all of them are particularly useful or interesting or things that anybody cares about. Or another example would be, it may produce something, but it may be marginally better than something, if you talk to a domain expert for 5 minutes, they would have told you themselves. Right? So then why did you invest all this time answering a question that you talked to a domain expert and 5 minutes is going to tell you what it's going to do? So that's why you need to bridge this gap. Otherwise, it's just going to be a busy project.
So it sounds like validating the information, being able to make sure that the data that's coming in is available, whether it's being captured, it already exists, and also obviously having the business case and the use case planned out. Now, we had a number of things that I was going to talk to you about, but one of the things I was going to ask you about in a little bit more detail is where your companies are active in. And so, Ethan, you showed us the indexer, the clip highlighter. Now, when you have customers come to you, do they say to you, we have this business problem that we need to solve? Or do they say, here's all this information and we don't know what to do with it?
It's probably a little bit of both. I think one of the most common problems in the media space today, and you can walk into almost any media environment, a local television station, a network newsroom, whatever it is it's around indexing and cataloging and creating metadata around video. Because all of this stuff, at least in the media space, it's all driven by metadata. So very similar to the Microsoft product, we have our Watson Video Enrichment product, which does a lot of the same things: keyword extraction, speech to text, natural language understanding, all of those types of things. So I come out of a broadcast background, and I know, because I've seen it and I've done it. You sit down, you type out 5 or 6 keywords, you spell some of them correctly, hit save, and that's the way a piece of content lives in an asset management platform in perpetuity. If someone doesn't know how I spelled Tappan Zee Bridge, they'll never find that piece of video. So it's applying logic to find solutions. So search and discovery is a driver to a lot of those pieces, which, I mean, at the end of the day, highlights is really search and discovery, right? It's how do you find those moments in a game that stand out and make you want to watch more of the game, watch the next clip, right? That's all driven off of the metadata, and it's all driven through correctly tagging, creating that experience, and then that experience leads you to more continued enjoyment and continued engagement with the content. So to me, when you think about, when I sit down with a customer, I really want to think about, the scope of what they're doing, and then trying to identify specific spots in their workflow where we can lend some help, free up people who are tagging videos one at a time to go do something else, like maybe create more video, and leave the tagging to us, because at least we'll spell all the words right.
So in fact, that brings up something that people often bring up, is that AI has the ability to take away some of the mundane tasks without taking away some of the skilled tasks, right? So you don't necessarily have to spend all your time sitting there doing the metadata tagging, but you do have to check it, because you need to make sure that it's right?
Hopefully, if you've trained properly, it's correct, but yes, you probably should check it.
Okay.
Yeah, and you're freeing up that person to go do a great deal more.
Right, and a great deal more probably that's interesting for them.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, when we think about so realistically, we've talked about a number of use cases here, and I want to make sure that we leave time for questions, but we've come across a number of different areas where people are working here in AI. Is there any other thing that you each have thought about that you thought to yourself, this is a really good potential solution? AI can actually bring some value to a customer.
So one of the challenges in streaming media is how do you create your ABR bitrate profiles? So much of it, the decision is made based on domain expertise, or generally for a small device, this rate is good enough. For this kind of content, this is good enough. However, we could actually learn from what is actually achievable, because it's not just a combination of the content complexity in the device, but it also depends on what the network is capable of delivering. So based on the content, I might decide that 2.5 and 4 megabits are the right choices for this particular video. That's great. But if very few people were able to reach the 4 megabits and more of them stayed at the 2.5 because there was no 3.5 option, we are not kind of learning all that today. We're setting something, we're looking at some trends, and then we may go back with a human and change something. But if we could learn these things, that could make our, for example, profile ladders much more efficient, not just suited to the content, but also suited to content plus network. So I think that's just one example, but there are many more in terms of what can be done with data and learning.
Yeah,
Now,
I totally agree with what Sangeeta is saying. I think a content-aware network is something that is like that. That is sort of where all of this goes at some point, and it's as valuable or more valuable than the sort of the metadata side of it. That's great at extracting things and finding ways to monetize it. I think looking at applying machine learning there has the quality of experience and the quality of service for delivery. so dramatically greater that people are willing to spend more money, or the advertising becomes no issue to watch for the content. So I totally agree that is sort of the direction that a lot of this will go.
Okay. And obviously, it's also search, right? Now, in order to find content, somebody needs to find what they're interested in, don't they, Suzanne? And so what happens to you when you say you have a customer who has a huge library of content?
Well, we always recommend a recommendation engine. And can I show the slides that I brought?
Sure. Would you like to come over?
Yeah.
Here. Okay.
Is it? We have to pull it up. Okay. So let's see. It's Rainey, probably that. Perfect. So these are a couple use cases that we have at Jump. Let's see. One of the ways we're using machine learning, is with clustering. So we look at it in 3 ways. The first is by engagement. So we look at your video services, all of your data, and then we determine how engaged the customers are, or the viewers. So in this case, you can see 64% are inactive, 18% are loyal, 15 are freezing, which means they're not using it very much, and then 3% are sleeping, which they're not using it at all. And as you might have seen in the first video, all of this data is immediately actionable, and you can use a marketing automation program to go directly to your users and market to them. We're also looking at by content type, so we have 35% that are addicted to series and movies, 24%, and then just a fraction at broadcast. And we're looking at by genre. So you can take any of these clusters and then market directly to your consumer, so it's allowing you to personally market at scale. We're also looking at customer lifetime value. So you can see in this example, the average is, I can't see it on this screen, but it's like $84 or something. And you can see how it skews, and you can see several other analytics that we have about how much their lifetime value is based upon how much they're watching. And we're looking at the user experience. So this is pretty small here, but we look at the pathway to their to viewing content. And you can see this is by device. And if it's above average, it means it's taking them a lot longer to get to the piece of content, which is bad for your viewer. And so you can dive deeper into it and go into a heat map and actually identify the bottleneck, and then go directly into your front end and make adjustments to improve it. And then we have analytics that will show you how it's improved after you've made this choice. So for I want to go back one. Our recommendation engine, I think Netflix says over 75% of their views they attribute to their recommendation engine. And I think that most of us know that it doesn't really work that well. So there's a lot of frustration in the market about recommendation engines. And most recommendation engines are just looking at the content and the user. But what we're doing is we're looking at time of day and the day of the week that they're using, and which device they're viewing it on, and where they're viewing it. So it puts it in a lot better context to be able to make relevant recommendations. And we're also enhancing the metadata with deep learning, as I mentioned, and using image recognition to also enhance the metadata.
So after we've heard a number of these use cases, if you think about it now, and I ask in the audience, who here thinks that they're using AI in any part of their workflow? Can I have series of hands up. Let's see. Okay, we've got a few more people. So I want to open, actually, I have one question left for the panel, but I'm going to first take some questions. Yeah, you are the first. So I don't have a mic, but if you ask the question, I will repeat it.
You guys talked a little bit about the bias in machine learning, and if you feed it with bad data, if you teach it something wrong, it kind of stays with it. A similar, maybe potential problem is how do you keep the algorithm or what you taught machine current? So for instance, with the churn prediction, it may work very well on today's behavior of people, right? But as people migrate to multiple OTT services and they have more choices, maybe their behavior before they churn will change. How do you keep that algorithm, up to date?
Up to date? Well,
So the question was, how do you keep the algorithm up to date? And I think that's actually fascinating because realistically, you want your 5-year-old to grow, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. And what we do is, with the churn prediction, we actually use 3 different algorithms. So we're testing those to see which one is performing the best, and then we use that algorithm. And also, just with experience, we have seen that we need to test it every 3 months. So it's actually not as often as you might think. And we have analytics that show how it's performing against prior usages. So we can see if it's continuing to perform well. And with the recommendation engine, we need to train it once a month. So it's much less time because there is much more activity related to that.
So can I just throw another quick buzzword into the discussion? When you think about the platform that IBM has, the Watson platform, it's a cognitive AI platform. So it's learning from itself as it goes along. So again, go back to the example of the Tappan Zee Bridge, right? You teach it Tappan Zee Bridge, so now it knows for that station in New York, Tappan Zee Bridge is spelled a specific way, capitalization in place, and we'll learn that going forward. So in New Jersey, there's a village called Tappan. So now it has learned how to spell Tappan, knows to capitalize it. So it has that reference point associated to it. So it's a cognitive learning process that goes. So this way, that 5-year-old can become a 6 or 7-year-old as it moves along. And that's what an enterprise AI platform will do, that will kind of be able to grow with your product.
The woman in the red here.
That point makes sense to me. Like having data, having values of certain variables change or at least grow over time, or at least add values to those variables over time makes sense. Like, if Tappan Zee Bridge is eventually called something else, you'll add that variable into that. Like you'll add that value to that variable, and it'll cognitively be aware that both tie into the same thing. But in terms of like data points, like time spent on a certain device is this data point in September of 2017, but it starts to skew in a different way. How do you go back and reteach your algorithm to understand, like, okay, well, forget about time spent on each device was happening, in the evening. Now people are doing it in the morning. So we're like your churn predictor is going to change based on like reteaching it those points. So what's that process?
Is the question then, how do you keep your 5-year-old from not becoming a 4-year-old?
So I don't think you want to forget any of those things, right? Because that change in user pattern, right, is a significant business driver for you. So you want to understand that change, right? So the algorithm of it in itself, and Lord knows I'm not a coder at any level, the algorithm doesn't change that much. The data set changes, right? And the data appreciation changes. And what a good AI platform should do is be able to point that out to you and say, and show you that trend before it's on top of you. And this way you can move your ad spends or move your buy times or whatever it is from that evening position to a morning position.
So you're more or less, you're trusting the platform itself to know the difference, like, and be able to make those recommendations, as opposed to kind of going wild with it.
I don't think the platform knows anything, right? The platform is pointing out trends and patterns. That's where, again, those humans, like who used to spend all of that time typing all that data in, that they don't have to do that anymore, they're now analyzing that data. And they're identifying those trends and those moments, those things to look at.
So another way to look at it is oftentimes in machine learning, you'll hear a point that, oh, this worked well on the training set, but does not work on the test set. So that typically means that the test set and training set look a little bit different. So in your example, so the 2017 data is what you trained on, and so it looks all good. Now this new data that you're testing on, which you're trying to maybe make a prediction or interpret or whatever, doesn't look much like your training set. And hence your accuracy of your model will reduce, right? Till it picks up these training samples into its set and actually retrains. So that's why periodic retraining is oftentimes needed.
Okay. The gentleman right behind the woman in red.
Hi, this is mostly for Ethan, but so the highlight clip maker that you developed with Fox, how rich was the metadata around those archives? Like how much was already filled in with regards to, oh, at this time in the game, a corner kick happened, and at this time in the game, something else happened, the yellow card came out. And how well, to sort of follow on from that, would the system work moving forward with metadata lean content or untagged content?
Okay, so the question was for the highlight clip creator that you created for Fox, how much metadata existed and how much metadata was needing to be acquired? Was that the correct question? And how well will it work moving forward? So will you become a 0-year-old?
So I'm going to answer your questions in backwards order. The output is only as good as the input, right? At the end of the day, right, you can't get away from that equation, right? So garbage data in, garbage data out. It is what it is. In the case of the Fox Sports highlight machine, and with a lot of sports, by the way, there are a couple of independent companies whose sole job is to create data feeds that go along with the sport. So in this case, for the FIFA World Cup, we used a company called Opta, O-P-T-A. Which creates and identifies each moment in a game. And Opta will send 6-7 people to like the World Cup match. They'll do college sports as well with a smaller crew of people. And they literally tag, this player's on the court, bounce the ball, dribble, whatever it is. So that data is key to creating those highlight moments. What we do then is we also do some other stuff around that in terms of watching on screen and doing some visual recognition. So, for instance, when we do the US Open, when a golfer raises his hands up because it's a great shot, we know that's an excitement moment, so we'll flag that. In tennis, when the crowd starts yelling and screaming about a match point, again, we'll flag that as an excitement moment. And we create what's called an excitement rating that goes along with the highlights. And then you can use that excitement rating in a lot of different ways. In the case of the Masters, what they do is they'll, over a certain threshold, those highlights will go out to social channels, and over, I think, 90 or 95% goes onto their website. So we do that based on the Opta data feed, plus player reaction, plus a little bit of the announcer reaction, plus crowd reaction.
Okay. Dom, do you have a question?
Yes, so with my streaming media writers hat on, being a bit of a pedant to that terminology. I did AI at university 25 years ago, and I'd like to know from the panel what's changed in 25 years which justifies us actually using the term AI. At the moment, this is all machine learning, this is all big data analysis, but we are still light years away from a general AI. You might just be skimming into some game theory, which you could call a narrow AI here, but this stuff isn't AI, it's big data analysis.
Okay, so and the term is driving him crazy. Is it AI? Is it big data?
It's not AGI. We're just talking about AI. So it's math, and it's big data, and it's computing power. So the thing that's changed in the time is the computing power.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I know that you want to have a conversation, and that big data question is going to happen in the courtyard over a beer. But I want to make sure that we catch everyone in here. Hi, you in the black.
So you guys gave some great use cases of the information output that you can get that could be applicable
So,
I know it can vary by use case, but maybe you could take one or two of the use cases you have. I think one great example is Suzanne said you can follow up and email customers, or you integrate with the marketing automation system to then reach out to them.
so the question is really about how, once you have some of this AI knowledge that you've created, how are you putting it to work? Suzanne, you can answer if you want, or I can actually open it up
That's
to
a great
anyone.
example that you used. And it's not just email. You can contact them however you want through the system is most effective. But if it's someone who's not watching, then that would be a good time to use email. You know, I want to turn the question around a little bit because one of the things that I'm finding, and our company's finding, is that it's really more just do it in this space. So identify your problem and then work back to figure out what solution that you need. So what do you want to solve? What do you want to achieve?
Okay. Does anyone else on the panel want to chime in here?
Well, from a sort of the metadata extraction side of it, having that in some sort of form that your systems can use. You're going to, again, we're just pulling that data out for you. Mm-hmm. You're probably putting it into your content management system or into an edit system in such a way that you can then retrieve that and use it to inform the editors or the content creators or the content producers that are building out your website or your application to use all that information. So again, we're just extracting the data. We're putting it into a nice format you can use on our site if you want to use it there. But having it in a JSON payload, which is how we happen to deliver it, makes it something that's fairly interoperable with a number of different systems. Mm-hmm. And trying to be conscious of that is the way that Microsoft has approached it.
So interruptible. Okay.
Interoperable.
And
Absolutely.
And the data lake, being able to actually have access to the data, being able to plan for it in the future. Did you want to mention anything else?
Yeah, so actually that was a good question because the one thing that I suggest to people when they say, oh, I have this use case, can machine learning solve it? As I said, okay, just imagine it solves it. And we tell you a number, 42. Okay, what are you going to do with it, right? So I generally ask people to work through that to make sure that they can actually act on whatever insight or information that the machine learning tool can provide. Whether the tool provides it is the next question, but even if it did, if you don't have a way to consume that information in an effective way, in an actionable way, then there's no point going after that use case. So that's an important insight to note, that what do you do with that output of that machine learning, even if it's a black box.
Okay, perfect. Is there any other question? We have one more. We have time for one more question. Yes?
This is kind of a far-out thought that I have. You talked about sort of content curation, extracting metadata from the content, right? But one of the challenges that people are having is trying to search and recommendation problem, which is the system understanding who I am, what my interests are, and putting in front of me what I really want. And I'm wondering if what we're actually looking for is an AI-based avatar of ourselves, which would then run against the curation AI and work in the background to make recommendations that way. Is that where we're really looking for? If that's true, how far away are we from having individual curation engines for ourselves?
Okay, so the question was, are we looking in the future at having an AI avatar of ourselves and having that interact with our systems?
I don't know that the avatar is coming anytime soon, but we're relatively close to that individual kind of curation model. Sort of looking in the future of what we're doing, at least in my group at Watson Media, is taking that data that we're pulling from content, matching it up with user data. And when you think about what's inside of IBM, right? It's one of the advantages to working for a company like IBM is that we own the weather company. And so we get all kinds of data from individual users about their location, the devices they use, what the weather is, the time of day they're checking for weather information. And we're able to then take that, correlate that to player data that we can pull from applications, from players that are embedded in applications, from website applications, mix that with the location data and the personal data and the demographic data, and then add into it the content data that we're pulling together. And we're able to then create for you, based on a catalog of content, curated lists that are individual to you. Because I sit around and watch hockey fights all day. Probably no one else in the room will do that. However, someone else may watch every corner kick from the FIFA World Cup, which I won't do. And having that knowledge and understanding of the individual, their habits, their time of day of doing these types of things, and what it is they're doing. So if you're sitting in the back of an Uber watching video clips, right, and we know that your phone is moving across a city, we know that you probably have 10 or 15 minutes to watch video. So let's bubble up a bunch of short clips to you, put some ads in the middle of it, and create an ROI for something like that. That's personalized recommendations.
All right.
I think that's true, but I think it's still going to be fairly media siloed for a while, meaning it's going to be a Netflix or a Hulu or somebody else. I think it's a much tougher solution to find those data streams crossed in a way that we truly get a personalized feed. So you'll have multiple personal feeds.
Right. So one last question just for the panel. So looking at the future, if you wanted to give people in the audience advice and you said, this is one area that you should think about doing and looking, Ethan, what would you say to them?
I would say look at your catalog, look at your archive of content and figure out what to do with it, right? And understand what you have on the content side, understand the data that you have, and understand and put together a business model that will get you to monetize that catalog of content that's sitting in an asset management platform, probably badly tagged, and probably not doing anything other than taking up space.
Okay, Suzanne?
Okay, so I recently read that 50% of companies are using AI, so that means 50% of companies are not using AI. I recommend you go out and do it, take a project, decide to do something, and experiment. And also start to socialize within your company AI, and don't get too caught up in, AGI and robots, but just the best AI is AI that people don't know they're using. So use AI that's natural and that people can intuitively know how to use it.
Andy?
Get started now. Start uploading content and finding out what the computers know about your content that you didn't.
Okay. Sangeeta?
I would suggest that if you're not that familiar with the space, get a little bit more familiar, get a bit more knowledgeable in the space, because there are going to be a lot of technologies being sold. A lot of vendors will be selling a lot of things to you. The more savvy you get about the space, you're going to be able to understand which of this is actually real, doable, relevant to you, useful to you. So I would focus on a slightly different angle, that either get yourself or someone on your team a little bit more knowledgeable about machine learning.
Perfect. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank our panel. And I actually want to encourage you to continue out in the area we have for cocktails. We also have the panelists. If you can find them and ask them some more questions, I'm sure they're going to be happy to talk further about AI, machine learning, and whether you're having a 5, a 6-year-old, or, I don't know, Dom, a 25-year-old that's negative 25? No. Anyway, thank you all, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye.